Look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar.
Propaganda and media influence more than you think. Let's begin with the conflation that Republicans use when referring to the claims of election interference from Russia in 2016 and of Trump's loss in 2020. They point out that the left can claim that an election is illegitimate based upon claims of election interference, but the right cannot. It's insane to me that anyone finds this argument to be reasonable since the claims are so completely different. To claim that an outside government interfering with an election is the same as actual American citizens trying to is ridiculous. Our intelligence agencies found that Russian-backed social media accounts were spreading misinformation with the goal of Trump gaining political favor. This is not even close to the same actions of American citizens violently breaking into the Capitol on the day of the certification of the vote, chanting 1776 and hang Mike Pence. The Senate Intelligence Committee released their final report into Russian interference around August of 2020. The bipartisan report concluded that Russia conducted a sophisticated and aggressive campaign to influence the United States elections to help Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton, and that folks on Team Trump were more than happy to accept help from the Russians. The committee also concludes that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the operation to hack Democratic computers and leak the stolen materials, and that WikiLeaks likely knew that this was assisting a Russian influence operation when it published them. The committee also concludes that the Trump campaign tried to take advantage of Russia's hacking operation by trying to play up the stolen Democratic emails. On July 13, 2018, a federal grand jury returned an indictment against 12 Russian military intelligence officers for their alleged roles in interfering with the 2016 United States elections. They were all charged with a computer hacking conspiracy involving gaining unauthorized access into the computers of U.S. persons and entities involved in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, stealing documents from those computers, and staging releases of the stolen documents to interfere with the 2016 U.S. presidential election. I bring this up because this one incident has two kinds of situations that hurt democracy. The first being outside propaganda from foreign governments looking to meddle in other state elections. This is dangerous not just for our elected officials, but especially in the case of Ukraine, our allies, and other countries around the world. If one is able to whip up the public demand for war, then war is more likely to follow. The second being how social media itself influenced the citizens. The spreading of the hacked materials from the DNC swayed some voters away from the Democratic Party or just to not vote, most of them being Bernie supporters. On top of all the misinformation spread through Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram from Russian accounts, Trump was able to be seen as a better choice for those undecided. This event undoubtedly influenced many voters' decision. The entire concept of advertising is now a field that is heavily influenced by psychology. Advertising experts now use concepts in that field to influence consumer behavior. If you think your brand loyalty and/or impulse to buy a product is entirely your own decision, I'm sorry to tell you that it's not. Advertising is basically the art of persuasion and communication. It uses all the senses to convey a message that will end up influencing the mind, whether that be immediately or somewhere down the line. Let's go over some great examples of how marketing and advertising are used to influence our behavior. One of the most successful ad campaigns in history created the diamond engagement ring. According to the American Gem Society, in 1947, De Beers launched its now classic slogan, "A diamond is forever." The durability of a diamond conveyed the meaning in the American psyche that marriage is forever. A diamond's purity and sparkle have now become symbols of the depth of two people's commitment to each other in practically all corners of the world. The opening of the De Beers mines in Africa made diamonds more accessible. In the 1930s, when demand for diamond rings declined in the US during hard economic times, the De Beers Company began a marketing campaign using photographs of glamorous movie stars swathed in diamonds. Within 3 years, the sales of diamonds had increased by 50%. Another incredibly successful ad campaign was the Marlboro Man. To overcome the idea that a filter was for a woman, the Leo Burnett advertising agency decided to attack that stigma head on, creating a a campaign where the manliest of manly dudes would be depicted smoking a Marlboro. The result would be nothing short of extraordinary, catapulting Marlboro from less than 1% of the cigarette market to the fourth biggest brand in under a year, eventually becoming the top cigarette brand in the world. As Brad Johnson, himself a former Marlboro man, once put it, the Marlboro Man was a fixture in American culture. For the longest time, he was on the same level as 007. These two examples showcase the power of how advertising, branding, and marketing can influence human behavior. The diamond ring became the most significant symbol in the performance of engagement and the social cue of being engaged. The Marlboro Man was a pop icon of masculinity for years. If these two campaigns were that successful, imagine how these same tactics could be used in politics. No one is immune from being influenced by propaganda or advertising, and one of the most significant examples of this is the estate tax. Originally, this tax was known as the estate tax, but the vast majority now refer to it as the death tax. Depending on what term you use, it signifies what side of the aisle you are. See, the estate tax wasn't originally a bad word. It stems from the idea that inheriting massive amounts of wealth contradicts the underlying value of bearing the fruit of your own labor. The person inheriting the property did not actually earn it nor produce any labor to justify its ownership. In 2016, a GOP consultant by the name of Frank Luntz revealed that changing the terminology from estate tax to death tax increased the number of people who opposed it by 10%. So much that Frank wrote, while a narrow majority would repeal the inheritance/estate tax, an overwhelming majority would repeal the death tax. If you want to kill the estate tax, call it a death tax. This memo was widely circulated among Republicans in Washington and helped gain enough support for the tax cuts under Bush in the 1990s. Nothing in life exists without context or something to help frame its conceptualization as an idea. The above definition frames the idea that one pays taxes upon death instead of taxes upon inherited wealth. Let me ask you this hypothetical. A man is caught stealing bread from a local vendor. He is sentenced to lose his right hand. In of itself, with the information being provided, we assume breaking the law is bad and that this man will deserve his punishment. We frame the idea of those who break the law as bad people. What if this man was stealing to feed his hungry child? Does this information not change your perception of the events? Sure, the man broke the law and no one refutes that, but how you view the man probably changed from seeing him as a criminal to seeing him as someone just trying to provide a life-sustaining food to his child. The perception of theft is changed when more information is added. This could soften your views about theft and lead to theft not being treated so harshly without at first knowing the full context of the situation. Stealing to fulfill a selfish personal gain versus stealing to not die from hunger are totally different in my opinion. How those in power choose their constituents. Is it possible to have a democratic government if those in power get to choose who they represent? It seems for many districts in our country, our politicians choose their own voters to secure power. There are two ways this is accomplished. One is through the process of gerrymandering, and the other is just simply moving to another district. What does it mean to gerrymander? It is the practice of drawing the boundaries of electoral districts in a way that gives one political party an unfair advantage over its rivals, political or partisan gerrymandering, or that dilutes the voting power of members of ethnic or linguistic minority groups, racial gerrymandering. A recent theory called the independent state legislator theory has been pushed to give state legislators wide authority to gerrymander electoral maps, pass voter suppression laws, and even overturn elections. It insists that the Elections Clause and the Presidential Electors Clause gives legislators exclusive and near absolute power to regulate federal elections. The Supreme Court has recently shot down this theory in Moore v. Harper with the ruling, the Elections Clause does not insulate state legislators from the ordinary exercise of state judicial review. North Carolina has been the most recent high-profile case of gerrymandering. In the case of League of Women Voters versus Rucho, according to the Brennan Center for Justice, on October 24, 2013, plaintiffs in Harris v. McCrory filed suit alleging that North Carolina packed African American voters into the 1st and 12th congressional districts when it redrew its congressional district lines in 2011. The district lines, they argued, diluted African American voting power and violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. In early February, the 3-judge panel agreed and struck down the state's congressional map as an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Then the North Carolina legislature held an emergency special session where it redrew the map. However, in redrawing the maps, legislative leaders adopted rules that required proposed maps to maintain the state's partisan balance of 10 Republicans and 3 Democratic seats. A key legislative leader stated on the floor that, "I acknowledge freely that this would be a political gerrymander, which is not against the law." While the original Harris v. McCrory case is still being appealed, the League of Women Voters has since filed suits in district court, also challenging the constitutionality of the 2016 remedial plan. But it was later decided that partisan gerrymandering claims are non-justiciable and that the case should be dismissed. Those who are in power will usually create districts to make sure a certain group wins and retains power. It's not just Republicans that do it. Both sides are guilty of this practice. Democrats held Texas for years before Republicans were finally able to break through in 1995 and have since held the majority of the government. Texas is technically a purple state, but because of how the districts are designed, major Democratic cities are split up into smaller regions that dilute the power of those voters. Austin is technically a blue city, but it has more Republicans because of how the city is split into districts. Of course, this type of behavior was not something the original founding fathers had in mind when they debated the Constitution. Madison himself said, whenever the state legislatures had a favorite measure to carry, they would take care so to mold their regulations as to favor the candidates they wished to succeed. It was impossible to foresee all the abuses that might be made of this discretionary power. Other than gerrymandering, another way parties keep power is through moving candidates to new districts entirely. This is accomplished by either having the candidate move their home residence to another state or district, or just buy a piece of property and change one's primary residence. More recently, this is what Lauren Boebert has decided to do. After barely winning her last election by less than 600 votes, she has decided to run for Colorado's 4th district and abandon her current district. She is hoping to capitalize on Ken Buck retiring from his position and gain a far safer seat in the House. However, Buck is retiring based upon the fact he doesn't agree where his party is heading, and I am positive that includes people like Boebert. Another known tactic was used by Herschel Walker in his race for the Georgia Senate. In 2021, he listed his Atlanta property as a rental property and declared his Texas home as his primary residence. When it came time to throw his hat in the ring, he then declared his Atlanta property his primary residence so that he could run for the open seat. While none of what he did is illegal, it does raise questions about the ability of wealthy property owners to capitalize on political positions, and if the person even running is trying to represent the constituents of that district or just chasing political power. Both questions philosophically are at odds with the democratic nature of our Constitution, but moving to a new district to win and or owning multiple houses across the nation is not against most election laws or rules. It just goes to show you who really runs our country. It's not your average everyday American. It's usually someone with a lot of wealth and a huge network. While it is possible for anyone to run for office, the reality is that just anyone is going to be elected is the illusion. The glaring problem of a free society in a democratic government. A government of the people, by the people, for the people. A statement from the Gettysburg Address that encapsulates the American ideas found in the Constitution. A government that is not separate from the people whom it serves. But here lies the problem. What happens when the people are wrong? What happens when people are being manipulated through the free press? What happens when the people vote against their own interest? What happens if the people vote in another Adolf Hitler? This is one of the biggest problems I see with the American project. The fact that people can and have voted for disastrous policies that can affect their own citizens and even themselves negatively. The biggest example of this are policies such as slavery, women's rights, and minority LGBTQ+ issues. We have since corrected many of these policies, but the fact that so many people had to suffer for years before they were dismantled is the problem. Our Constitution protects the basic rights of certain people, and those those not specifically mentioned are legislated and are treated unjustly. With the rise of Donald Trump, the right wing seems to have fallen further away from reality. They will jump through the most insane and incredible mental gymnastics to believe Trump's lies. At this point, I believe Trump could make his followers believe Santa Claus is real if he told him he personally visited the North Pole and got his endorsement. By the way, this is the worst looking Santa Claus I have ever seen. There are a large swath that honestly believe Trump is Jesus's personally picked Messiah, sent here to save America from evil. No, I want you to think about that for a minute. Really, take it in that this day and age, people hold that thought as truth. One of the major pillars that allow democracies to continue to function and represent the people is an informed citizenry. If citizens use information that is misinformation or disinformation to inform their beliefs, then that leads to informing how they vote. Democracy will eventually die. While there has always been disinformation, misinformation, and conspiracy theories in this country, the rise of Trump brought this problem to the forefront. This version of right-wing politics has done something that the previous versions just couldn't. It successfully destroyed faith in America's institutions that provided credible information to voters. The biggest example of this I can think of was during the COVID pandemic. Trump not only helped sow distrust in our government institutions, but in the field of medical science overall. His constant attacks on Dr. Anthony Fauci and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease drove a spike through his base and the evolving science around COVID. There was a point in time that all Americans could look at what our government institutions said about a disease, and they would take that as empirical fact. They would use that information to make better decisions during times of pandemics to not only protect themselves, but their fellow citizens. Trump and the right-wing media used COVID to further divide the American public. Instead of pushing the current consensus on COVID, they all pushed theories that not only benefited them or continued to erode the trust of their base with science and government institutions. And the results of this were disastrous. Not only did Trump fail to respond to the seriousness of COVID, but he also actively chose to ignore experts who warned him of the very real possibility of a pandemic of this nature. According to the paper in the National Library of Medicine titled "The Trump Administration and the COVID-19 Crisis: Exploring the Warning Response Problems and Missed Opportunities of a Public Health Emergency," in March 2020, it claimed nobody knew there'd be a pandemic or an epidemic of this proportion. Nobody's ever seen anything like this before. Furthermore, although he had received abundant warnings, President Trump regularly asserted in his coronavirus task force press briefings that nobody could have known a thing like this could have happened. Such statements could easily be dismissed as self-serving political rhetoric, but for the fact that not only the words but also the substance of the Trump administration's policy reaction to the pandemic suggests a tragic failure to proactively mount a focused whole of government and whole of society response to indications of a rapidly intensifying public health threat. The paper further explains how Trump's response to COVID was just psychological denial and wishful thinking. He actively caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans with statements like publicly questioning the need for measures, falsely stating that it's going to go away, and claiming that with or without a vaccine, it's going to pass and we're going to be back to normal. Trump's agenda was to open the country regardless of the facts on the ground, because his 2020 campaign centerpiece was that he made America great again by delivering a strong economy, low unemployment, and a rising stock market. He focused more on those things at the detriment of the American people. Trump and some of his closest advisors were reluctant to enact intrusive measures, mass testing, and non-pharmaceutical interventions, preoccupied with how the public statements and policies would affect the stock market and his approval ratings, and obsessed with how the optics of the pandemic and the federal government's response would affect Trump's bid for re-election. Due to the Trump's administration being more focused on re-election, the United States accounted for over 20% of all confirmed COVID-19 cases and deaths worldwide that took place. Not only did Trump's inaction cause the pandemic to get worse, but so did his actual rhetoric. Statements such as, "This is a fluke," This is like a flu. If we have thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that get better just by, sitting around and then even going to work, some of them go to work, but they get better. Stay calm. It'll go away. You know it is going away, and it will go away, and we're going to have a great victory. If you look at children are almost, and I would say definitely, but almost immune from this disease. The deep state, or whoever over at the FDA, is making it very difficult for drug companies to get people in order to test the vaccines and therapeutics. Obviously, they're hoping to delay the answer until after November 3rd. Must focus on speed and saving lives. He'll listen to the scientists. If I listened totally to the scientists, we would right now have a country that would be in a massive depression instead. We're like a rocket ship. Take a look at the numbers. Our doctors get more money if someone dies from COVID, and so when in doubt, choose COVID. Not to mention him promoting alternative methods and refusing to promote the wearing of face masks. All of these things, coming from one of the most powerful men in the country, our head of state, led people to not trusting federal institutions and scientists. They only trusted him, and he continually lied and made things up that would make him look better in the polls. His own narcissism and wanting to win his re-election cost hundreds of thousands of lives in this country. He single-handedly destroyed many people's trust in our most coveted institutions that only mean to serve and protect the people. They make no profits. They work and produce policies in the best interest of the citizens with the information available. Just looked at how he talked about Fauci.
Of hearing Fauci and all these idiots. Every time he goes on television, there's always a bomb, but there's a bigger bomb if you fire him.
Fauci also revealed that he's protected round the clock by federal agents because he and his family are getting death threats.
That's sad. The very fact that a public health message to save lives triggers such venom and animosity to me that it results in real and credible threats to my life and my safety.
Beyond destroying the public's trust in science and government institutions, they have also attacked our public education system. Hold on, do you see this kid's face right here? You can tell this kid has no fucking clue why he's holding that sign. He's probably thinking about the ice cream cone they promised him to stand there. I won't get too far into the whole attack on public education because it's a whole topic by itself, and Zoe B did a great job outlining this in her video, The Right-Wing War on Education. I highly suggest you check it out. However, I wanted to just point out how the right wing is chipping away at the pillar of an informed citizenry. The corroborated top-down and bottom-up attack on our public education system destroys the ability of our citizens to access decent information at no cost. While I understand a lot of our country's history and stuff is taught from a biased perspective and it glosses over the bad portions of our history, we all at least had this common ground we could start from. This attack on public education smashes this common ground. It introduces too many narratives that are more driven by profit, propaganda, and indoctrination than finding the objective truth. So, what does this all mean? It seems that while the right wing of America wants to say that they're somewhat classical liberal and against majority rule, they are actively promoting the counter to these concepts within their own party. Trump has paved the path for right-wing populism to take hold of the Republican Party. This has allowed ideas such as Project 2025 and nationalism to take hold of the party platform. If you've not heard of Project 2025, then I suggest you take some time and read or watch a video on what it's about. This single-handedly should drive anyone on the left to the polls to prevent its execution. If implemented, it would fundamentally change how the government operates and purge all political opponents from its core. On top of that, the rise of nationalism, in my opinion, within the party hangs on two different catalysts. One being the ultra-religious wanting to take all the credit for the founding and continued existence of the United States, and the other is the failure of the Republican Party to be anything other than an obstructionist concept. Christian nationalism has been on the rise since the election of Donald Trump, even for it to be called out in Christianity Today as a danger to America. Christianity Today is an evangelical Christian media magazine founded by Billy Graham. In an article called "What is Christian Nationalism?" posted on February 3rd, 2021, the author writes, Christianity is a religion focused on the person and work of Jesus Christ as defined by the Christian Bible and the Apostles and Nicene Creeds. It is the gathering of people from every nation and tribe and people and language who worship Jesus, Revelation 7:9, a faith that unites Jews and Greeks, Americans and non-Americans together. Christianity is political in the sense that its adherents have always understood their faith to challenge, affect, and transcend their worldly loyalties, but there is no single view on what political implications flow from Christian faith, other than that we should fear God, honor the King. 1 Pet 2:17. Pay our taxes, love our neighbors, and seek justice. Christian nationalism is, by contrast, a political ideology focused on the national identity of the United States. It includes a specific understanding of American history and American government that are, obviously, extra-biblical, an understanding that is contested by many historians and political scientists. Most importantly, Christian nationalism includes specific policy prescriptions that it claims are biblical but are at best extrapolations from biblical principles and at worst contradictory to them. Not only this, but another idea that is gaining popularity with the ultra-religious is the separation of church and state is a misunderstanding. The newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, believes that the separation of church and state is a misnomer. People misunderstand it. Of course, it comes from a phrase that was in a letter that Jefferson wrote. It's not in the Constitution. This guy is in line to be President of the United States. 150 years of a common interpretation of the Establishment Clause is somehow just a misnomer to him. Disregarding the original reason the colonists of America left England to begin with, to worship the God that they choose. Why would they leave a religious monarch only to set up a theocracy? It makes no sense in my opinion. Speaking at religious service Sunday in Colorado, Representative Lauren Boebert told worshipers the church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does. While these two examples are some of the more well-known politicians, the anti-separation of church and state sentiment has grown within religious communities, especially on the right. It is interesting to note that in a Pew Research paper, they found that many Republicans don't want the nation to declare an official religion, but have no problem with displaying religious symbols on public property, having teachers lead Christian prayers in school, or 29% of them believing that the US Constitution was inspired by God. Compare that to Democrats, and you can clearly see a huge divide in the parties when it comes to religion in the public square. The rise of Christian nationalism plays a huge part in defining our current political environment. People like Lauren Boebert are either so stupid they don't understand words or are deliberately misleading people. I have heard people explain Christian nationalism as a patriot who just loves their country and believes in Christ. This is a dangerous rhetoric because that's not at all what Christian nationalism is. One can love the United States and follow Christ without being a Christian nationalist. I'll show you the difference. Boebert has said, I believe that there have been two nations that have been created to glorify God, Israel, whom we bless, and the United States of America. Boebert said in June, and this nation will glorify God. She believes that this country was created by God himself, which is way different than believing a God exists and loving the country one finds himself a citizen of. There is a huge gap to get from this country's past being inspired by God's vision versus this country being created for and by God. Their rhetoric is scary. Christians don't believe all the same thing. They differ on so many translations that it's impossible to find common ground between all of them beyond Jesus being the Savior. So many different misinterpretations have spawned countless denominations that it would be asinine to believe that this country was created for Christians. Like, what interpretation would be the final say? Which one would be allowed to set the rules? There are Christian denominations that believe the LGBTQ community is demonic, while others believe they're just God's creations. How does one rectify this? If Christian nationalists took control, how could they even agree on basic concepts such as divorce, celebration of holidays, seed faith gospel, and whatever else they differ on? I honestly don't know how much longer our current form of government is going to last. Many of the minority views are destroying the very foundations of this country to make it their own. They are abusing the protections the Constitution affords them. Misinformation and disinformation are creating voters that vote against their own self-interest. Corporations and the wealthy pump so much money into politics that it almost drowns out individual voices. Everyone has a problem with other people's representatives, but never their own. Voter fatigue and political fatigue allows terrible candidates to win elections. Tribalism and trying to win the culture wars has become more important than actual policy. Anyway, thanks guys for listening, and I hope this adds some more clarity into some problems of our democracy and maybe some solutions on how we can fix it. Please like, share, and subscribe. I'm mostly active on TikTok, so if you want to see me there, I do live sometimes and post a lot more content. Thank you, and have a good day.